Guy by himself in children's section. This happened maybe about 20 years ago. I was around 5 or 6 at the time. I lived in a fairly safe middle-class neighborhood and loved going to the library. My mom would usually take my brother and I and would walk him around in the stroller while I browsed books in the children's section. It was a small library, and always felt safe as my mom frequently checked on me to ensure that I was okay. One day I vaguely remember noticing a man who was in the children's section browsing books by himself. I was browsing Choose Your Own Adventure section when I noticed him one row over unzipping his fly. Through the slats of the bookshelf I felt very embarrassed, but was too confused to do anything but stare. He took his dick out and walked around holding it like it was no big deal. Hindsight, I should have ran to find an adult or my mom, but I was frozen. I hope my mother didn't come to check on me at that point, because I felt like I would be in trouble for staring. I kept trying to pay attention to the books, but I was too engrossed and disturbed by this man that I was just frozen. I remember it feeling like hours, but on reality my mom checked on me almost every 5 minutes, so it couldn't have been more than a few minutes. Eventually, after finally snapping to my senses, I ran over to my mom and stuck to her like glue for the remainder of the trip. I was afraid to be by myself at the library ever again, and never told another adult. I wish I had the mindset to understand that a grown man playing with his dick in the children's section of the library was wrong. I just hope eventually someone caught him before another kid had to see it. Library regular. For clarification, I am a 26-year-old female, and I work the front desk at a public library. Let me tell you about Hank. He's mid-30s, average-looking guy, and he's always with his mother. He has some sort of mental disability that no one is really sure of. From what I heard, he suffered brain damage as a child, which gives him a speech impediment. Most of all, he loves to read. Boy howdy. Once or twice a week, Hank and his mother come in with bags overflowing with books to return, only to come back to the desk with an equally tall pile of checkouts. He talks about his favorite ones out of the return bag and rattles off lists of titles for us to reserve for him. When he's not physically in the library, he calls us with requests, or just to ask if his previous orders are ready. And speaking of those orders, his lists are so long that something arrives for him almost every day. Rarely a day goes by where Hank isn't mentioned in some way at the library. All the librarians know Hank, and he knows us all by name, and he's usually polite and upbeat, and likes to share what he's reading with us. This would be all fine if Hank's favorite genre didn't happen to be romance. And I don't mean Nicholas Sparks. I'm talking about the endless abyss of Harlequin sleaze, pulpy paperbacks with nearly broken spines and covers bearing cheeky titles and glistening faceless torsos locked in passionate embrace. Obviously, these books are popular to begin with, hence their ruined spines, and we librarians see all kinds of snicker-worthy titles to check out. We're all adults, and we'd all read our share of smut, so it's not as if we're a bunch of prudes passing judgment, but whereas most patrons have some sense of modesty about their sexier checkouts, Hank doesn't hold back. He has absolutely no shame about his romance habit because, as far as I can tell, to him they're just books, no different than any other book in the library. He'll spout off the most ridiculous-sounding titles and gush about authors with the same unchecked enthusiasm teenagers have when they're telling me about the YA series. So far, this is all quite harmless, I guess, if not a little unusual. My problem with Hank is that I'm his favorite. I could tell from the moment I met him that he liked me, given how friendly and personal he was. It only got uncomfortable when one day he invited me to his house. Of course, I politely declined, but when he went on to explain that he and his mom had really fixed the place up and we could have dinner and play Xbox together, I said no, and mentioned that I had a boyfriend, to which Hank became very visibly frustrated and said it was nothing like that, he just wanted to hang out with me. I declined again, and he finally gave up and left. Freaked out but slightly amused, I hurried to the break room to tell my friends. They all laughed and told me Hank was known to become very interested in new staff, and this wasn't the first time someone had been invited to his house, so I brushed it off and didn't take it too personally. Another incident was not so easy to ignore. It was the day before Christmas break, so the library was predictably dead. My coworkers and I had a nice time kicking back and chatting about our plans for the holidays. Seeing to the few patrons we had, the phone rings, I answer, and it's Hank. We exchange pleasantries. He asks to renew his books, business as usual. I process his request, we say Merry Christmas, and as I'm about to hang up, I hear, "Hey!" I put the phone back up to my ear in a quiet, sheepish voice. He says, "You're really cute," and hangs up. Fast forward a few months later, and once again, when I pick up the phone, it's Hank. As I said, he calls pretty frequently, and somehow I'm usually the one to answer. He often keeps me on the phone for 10 minutes or more while he asks about his books and places requests, and while I come to expect it, it doesn't make the process any easier or less annoyingly time-consuming. During this particular call, after he's already had me on the phone for quite a while now, he eventually asked me to read a description of a particular book. I'm caught off guard, since that's not a common question, so I look up the title on Amazon. The book jacket blurb is so overloaded with flowery language that you could practically hear the bodices ripping, and I quickly decided that there was no way I was reading this out loud to a man over the phone. I told him there was no description listed in the library catalog, and with that, he abruptly ended the call. Keep in mind that between these incidences, I still see Hank all the time. He makes it a point to come to my desk, and when he's got me, he's very reluctant to let go. He spends as much time as he can at my desk, filling with his bag, asking redundant questions, all the while clearly racking his brain for what to say next. He always tells me how nice I look. Meanwhile, his mother stands next to him, avoiding eye contact with me, mostly silent. When she does speak, it's only to say, "Hank," in an insistent tone, whenever he dawdles for too long at the desk. There are times that she has practically dragged him away. Her sheer embarrassment, bordering on contempt, used to bother me out of sympathy for Hank. These days, I wonder if she knows something we don't. The latest incident was the tipping point. Hank and his mother comes in, unloading their returns into the bin again. Hank already babbling about what he wants renewed. His mother quickly disappears to do her browsing, and I set to filling Hank's request. Then he asked if I could tell him what he currently has on hold, and I'm already inwardly groaning when I see the list of over 30 entries on it. I start reading the titles aloud, which start off with sci-fi and fantasy. Then suddenly, I'm careening down a list of 20 books that all include the term bad boys. It was a fucking series, and each title was more puntastic than the last. I tried to be professional, but I'm sure my disgust was obvious. As I kept reading out the titles, I felt like everyone was listening to this and enjoying my discomfort, Hank especially. When I finally reached the end of the list and looked up at him, he was beaming, his eyes wide with excitement, and suddenly I felt sick. He leaned in and said, "What was that last one?" My helpful librarian mask was completely gone by this point. I set my jaw, shoomy eyes, and said slowly and without a hint of sweetness, "I like bad boys." Hank flashed me another big smile, said a quick thank you, and ran off, practically giggling with glee. After that, I took my break and hid in the back until I was sure he and his mother had left. That last bit about 2 weeks ago. Ever since, I've tried my best to avoid Hank. When I see him coming, I make myself disappear. There's not much I can do about the phone call since that's left up to chance, but when I have spoken to him, I am efficient yet unfriendly. I hate to be that way, but it seems to be working, since he doesn't seem to hunt me down the way he used to. I like to think he's made the connection between his behavior and my sudden coldness, but I doubt it. And even if he has, it hasn't stopped him from engaging in similar conversations with the other younger girls at the library. Maybe I am an insensitive asshole prude, but I simply don't believe he's as naive as he appears, and it's a little unnerving to humor a grown man the way you would a teenage boy. Either way, I can only hope he'll eventually run out of printed smut and make the leap to digital. Then, whatever happens is between him and Amazon. Overnights at the library. So I just recently found this subreddit and decided to post my strange experiences based on its similarities to the others I've read on here. Context: I work overnights at the university library in the city where I live. It's a nice job, where I mostly don't have to do much work to do, besides getting up every 30 minutes to push in chairs and clean up the debris, etc. Anyways, early in the semester, when no students stay overnight at the library on Thursday nights, I had a strange experience. It was about 4 in the morning, and I had already been around the library a couple times and established, so I thought, that no one was in the building besides me and the guy at the security desk, which is out of my view. Anyways, around this time, a very large man approaches the desk at which I work and starts to fiddle around with the staplers and tape which are left out for the students' use. I ask him if I can help him with anything, and he responds, "I don't know." "Is there anything you can help me with, nigger?" He starts to laugh very loudly and quickly walks away from the desk. Of course, I'm offended and taken aback, so I go over to the security desk and explain the situation. The security fellow is dumbfounded. He says that no one has come in for hours, and we each have been around the library several times and seen nobody. We do a sweep of the library but find nobody. At this point, things are a bit uneasy, but I return to my desk. Behind my desk is a door to an empty office which is always locked. As I begin to get back to reading my book, I hear the slightest of noises behind me. Trying to sneak out of the office is the guy with a thin cord in his hand. I yell, "Oh shit!" and he lets out an inhuman scream, which chilled me to the bone. At this point, I'm up out of my chair and ready to go at it with this guy, but instead of coming after me, the guy just lays down on the floor laughing and screaming and talking about killing niggers. Not cool. Anyway, security guy calls the police, and they take the mentally deranged fellow away. He had a couple of wire on him along with some other interesting materials: a hammer, alarm clock, canteen full of piss, a decent amount of cheese, and brass knuckles. Police tells us later that he was MIA from a halfway house nearby and had a stolen keycard, which he used to crash in the empty office for a couple days.